was just speaking to Rob Hope, which I don't know if you caught that episode yet.
Yeah, I watched that one.
And he loves, and he specifically worked in that lower rep range that I think it was like 4 to 6. Sometimes he's even tapping into the 2s. What's interesting about that, and obviously everybody's going to be different with their, again, pre-existing injuries, how that's going to relate to certain things like working in the low reps versus the higher reps, especially if you're doing max effort stuff. But if you're doing, let's say, these low reps, maybe that works for certain exercises. Like I find that for me at least, when I'm working with dumbbells, any sort of pressing, I like to be in that 4 to 6 rep range. And if I go any higher than that, what's interesting about that is I see no progress for months on end. But if I stay in the 4 to 6, I just notice that I can progress much better than if I stay in a higher rep range. But that's not the case with all body parts or all exercises. That's just a specific example, right? So I don't know if you have experience with that, or is it like all body parts for you? You kind of notice that this is that sweet spot for you, these higher reps, relatively speaking.
So, I mean, the 5 is kind of the lowest that I'd go. So 4 or 5. And there've been exercises where I've jumped up the load and I've only gotten 3.5. And I've been squeezing out, trying to get a 4th rep. It's not happened. I mean, I'll take that as a starting point. I'm not against having 3.5 reps as long as it's pushing really close to failure. That's, I think, the main thing. But guys that have built physiques from really low reps or higher reps, it's about how close it is, the intensity of the set, how close it is to getting to muscular failure. So it's about achieving that kind of sort of mechanical tension where you're really pushing the muscle to the point where it cannot contract harder or it cannot contract. That's kind of it. That's your limiting factor. But one of the things that I've started implementing is not thinking about how many reps can I do with a certain weight. Instead, it's how can I make sure that I fail and that I cannot do another rep within this target rep range. So it could be a case of I've got these dumbbells, I'm doing this incline chest press. My target rep range is 6 to 8. If I lift them in a certain way, I could get 12 reps. If I cut the rep short, if I squeeze and kind of tuck my shoulders in, and if I kind of bounce a little at the bottom, I could squeeze out 12 reps, 13 reps, 14 reps. But if I was to really slow it down, if I was to hold it at the bottom and get comfortable in that stretch position, drive up at the top, not lock out fully, just keep the tension on the pec, and then take it down really, really slowly each time within reason. Okay, not like a 30-second descent, but if I'm able to make that rep harder and get to a point where I completely fail at 9.5 reps, I've done a much better job than if I'd have done 15 reps and gone brilliant. I can write that in my logbook because I did one more than last week if I kind of cheated my way through that set.
That makes sense. So you're about standardizing, making sure the right muscles are engaging, making sure you're controlling throughout the full range. Those are all important things, right?
So trying to make it harder instead of making it heavier.
And obviously the demographic listening to this, there's going to be a mix of advanced and maybe beginners. Like I don't want people to get the wrong idea as far as when you're doing something like how you're mentioning, like that's always going to take priority, if you will. You want to make sure you're controlling the reps. There's a level of awareness to the area you're trying to work to a degree. Of course, if you're doing lower reps, like the 4 to 6, let's just say for someone who might be doing that for a specific time frame, you're not going to feel it as much as if you're doing 8+ reps. Like you're just not building up as much metabolites, if you will, in that area in order to get a sensation, assuming you're doing all the right things that contribute to that. And there is a nutritional component to getting a pump as well. So I think that also has to be considered. But what I'm trying to get at for those listening, don't go too far on one extreme where you're staying with the pink dumbbells. This is an extreme example for weeks and weeks on end because you're trying to make that harder. There has to be a balance between the two ends, if you will. You don't want to just increase load and get reckless with that, but you also don't want to, now I just want to feel this upper pec fiber contract, you know? And I know you're not saying that, Mitch, but maybe someone is misinterpreting potentially what's being said. I just want to add that in to maybe avoid that for someone who's new that's listening.
Yeah, that's it. And that's why we don't all train 50 reps on an exercise. We don't all train in a certain way with barely any load. We're not all just there doing press ups with no weight. Just try and feel a pump. I think that was one of the things I wrote down when I started the off season after 2021. I said I was going to cut junk volume because I was doing too much of that. I was doing 3 sets of an exercise just for the sake of it, and also focusing on just challenging the muscle and getting to failure, not making it like an emotional experience. I don't need to go into too much sort of a drama when I'm doing it, but it's about making sure that I am pushing it to the point where that intensity is there and I cannot do another rep. And I think that's what I've really noticed has helped in my training. I'm doing less total sets. I'm not doing exercises or things just for the sake of it. I'm in and out of the gym in an hour to an hour and 15 generally. Some sessions, like my shoulder push session, is generally about 50, 55 minutes, but I don't worry too much about the time it takes. But I know that I've got about an hour hour, maybe a little bit longer for legs, for example, before I'm going to start to tail off. So I need to make the most of that time that I am working, focusing on the quality of the sets, the quality of the movement, and whether that exercise is actually going to do something for me, or whether I'm doing it because it gives me a nice pump.
It's interesting because I'll have like 2 days, like one day where I am focusing on the lower rep ranges for certain exercises, and then another day where I just want to get a pump, but still abiding by these principles of, is there progress within this framework, right? It's not just let me go mindlessly, randomly get a pump. There's progression in place, but it's within the framework of, if I'm just feeling elbow or like nothing when I'm doing my tricep extensions because all I care about is the weight, that's a problem. I think that's not what you want, right? To be honest, when I work in the 4 to 6 rep range, I still get a pump with my dumbbell presses, with my rows. Like I'll get a pump still. So that should tell you something like, okay, if you look at it, you're like, oh, this guy's really controlling the eccentrics. Maybe there's a lot of experience there that makes sense. But if you're looking at someone else and they're just ripping through it, sloppy, just the load is just smashing their chest at the bottom with no control of the eccentric, how are you going to get a pump doing that? It's not going to happen, right? If that's to a degree your concern, if you want to play that game, right?
Exactly. And I think that's it. It's very different of getting a pump and experiencing that in the gym, as opposed to just chasing for the sake of it, just literally doing it for no other reason. And I think I don't go into the gym going, right, I'm going to get a pump for my chest. This is what I'm going to work towards. It's a byproduct, and it tells me that I'm doing exercises that are targeting that muscle. And you're right, you do a heavy set of 5 or 6 and you should be able to feel that muscle's worked hard, and you should be able to feel some kind of tightness or pump. And that's another thing that I wrote down, is that I'm not chasing a pump. I don't go in there thinking, how am I going to get a really good pump today? Instead, I'm focusing on, am I going to do better? How am I going to overload the muscle from last week or 2 weeks ago, and making sure that I'm progressing in the way that I'm training, in the way that I'm performing, and not letting the execution side of it go downhill.
Okay. Obviously, you can't take away your experience of visiting those low rep ranges, but do you think that was a big component of building the foundation of your physique, building up that strength to a certain point? I know it's relative to what you were once doing, like we talked about, and not comparing yourself to others, but you're lifting some heavy loads, man. 400-pound deadlifts, 120-pound dumbbells, presses. That's heavy stuff, right? So it's heavy duty, right? How important was that phase, if you will, where you were focusing on building up that strength?
When I finished gymnastics, I had a reasonably sort of well-developed upper body, and then from the waist down, it was like a drain pole. So my legs were really small, they were weak, and when I started lifting, it was 100 kilos on a squat was heavy, and I could only do it for sort of a few reps. And for me, that was where I had to really make some improvements in my strength, and that's when I noticed that I started to then grow. I think building up that strength over the few years that I really focused on it was important, and I think I needed to do that. If I'd done that from an earlier age, or if I was focusing on that and doing more with my legs throughout the period before that, I don't know whether I'd have needed to do so much of that, but I think it helped catch me up to a point where my legs were strong enough that I could then train them hard enough to make sure that they grew and caught up. In terms of upper body and I don't know, pressing strength, that was something I never really had to do too much focused strength training. I could walk into a gym as a teenager, bench 100 kilos, and I hadn't done it before, but that was from the gymnastics. That was from hanging on the rings and doing the crucifix and handstands and all sorts for the last 10 years. So I think it was very different for me with that. But in terms of building up legs size, I think getting the strength in place first and learning how to squat properly and learning how to use the muscles effectively was important for me before adding the size.
That's a very interesting conversation, because maybe there's a misconception that in order to get bigger, you need to get stronger to a degree. We know this, right? But there is a component of, if you're doing something that's getting the muscle bigger, even though you're not doing sub 5 repetitions, like let's say you're working in that 1 to 5 rep range or 1 to 4 rep range, even if you're doing 10 plus reps, if that's enough to cause a hypertrophic response, then a bigger muscle is going to be a stronger muscle. It's going to be able to produce more force. So if you go back to those lower reps, they work together. Like you can get bigger with the 10 plus reps working in that range. And then if you ever visit that 1 to 5 rep range again, at the beginning, maybe there's a skill component. You might notice maybe you're not lifting as much, potentially, depending on the gap and how long of a gap you took. But you should see that you actually are are stronger, I think.
Yeah, it is a skill. So being able to pull a heavy deadlift is a skill, as well as requiring a hell of a lot of strength. But I noticed that I switched to sort of a stiff leg deadlift. I focused on tempo. I took the weight down from trying to push up to sort of 210, 220 kilos, right down to sort of 160, 170, 180. And I did the work through there. And I would say that I'm stronger now than I was in the past, but I'm not lifting as heavy weights. So in terms of squats and deadlifts and bench press, I'm not pushing the same 1 rep max. If you ask me tomorrow, right, can you beat what you did however long ago? Maybe in terms of the skill, my body's not quite used to it. But if you said, right, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 weeks, get used to doing heavier deadlifts or get used to doing heavier singles for squat with maybe like a low bar technique so that you can use different muscles and focus on shifting load, I think I would be able to push more than I did in the past. I'm stronger now and I know that I am, but I don't need to do that.
Right. And because you're also carrying a lot more muscle than you were. So that in and of itself allows you to be able to, if you train for that, you'll see a substantial increase relative to what you did before.
Yeah, that's it. I jumped onto like a barbell flat bench just to be like, oh, the dumbbells are moving much easier. Let's see what this is like. And this was just after I'd competed, a few weeks after I competed. It didn't feel as good. The bar just didn't feel comfortable. It didn't feel like as natural a movement as with the dumbbells. I couldn't lift as much weight as before. I think I got to 140 and I moved it for a single and thought it's just not clicking. If I were to do it for a couple of months, yeah, it'd be fine. And I probably could push more than I have in the past. But equally, I just don't think it's worth it. Risk of injury and whether it's actually as good for developing my chest as the dumbbells are.
The split that you used to win that world championship title, what was it specifically?
5-day split, and it's basically a take on push-pull legs, and then the 4th and 5th session is another push session, and then it's a posterior chain session. So it's back, glutes, hamstrings, calves. 2 rest days taken in that, but sometimes I'll have 3.